I had always been proud of my decision to move into a nice, quiet apartment in what I thought was a safe neighborhood. I had my 2 dogs, Charles and Wigwam, and life felt pretty comfortable. Charles is a big, goofy corgi/German shepherd mix, a dog so affectionate he could practically suffocate you with his love. Wigwam, on the other hand, is a little less opso, a sweet dog, though he's terrified of his own shadow. The 2 of them balanced each other out, and together, we'd made a home. I'd only been living in the apartment for a month when I had an experience that made me question my decision to stay the full year. The building is set up in a way that every floor has a shared set of doors leading to 4 apartments, with a fire escape door that only opens from the inside. I lived on the back side of the building, so my patio was right near the fire escape stairs. It felt safe enough, but little did I know, things were about to take a dark turn. It was a snowy evening, about a week ago, and I'd cracked open my patio door to let in the cool air. I love the winter weather, and I'd always been the type to enjoy it even if it was a little chilly. I thought, I'm on the 5th floor, what's the worst that could happen? Mistake number 1. I should have locked that door, but I figured I'd only be outside for a few minutes anyway. The dogs hated the snow, so it was going to be a quick trip. I grabbed their leashes, locked the front door behind me, and stepped outside. I didn't think anything of it. I was on my own in a safe apartment building, after all. The walk was quick, just a few minutes in the snow, and we made our way back inside. But something didn't sit right when we got back into the apartment. The moment we stepped in, both dogs darted over to the patio door. I noticed it immediately. The door was shut, and the bar lock was in place. I froze for a moment. That's weird, I thought. I never locked the door behind me when I left. But it didn't click in that moment. I was more concerned with getting inside and settling in for the night. I walked into the kitchen to grab some dog treats when the dogs suddenly went absolutely crazy. They were barking and growling, and they weren't stopping. It was unlike anything I had ever heard from them. The growls were deep, primal, full of fear. I turned to see what had them so worked up and froze when I caught sight of it. A pair of eyes staring up at me from beneath the cedar chest in the corner of my living room. They glinted in the dim light, cold and calculating. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, about 5 seconds, but long enough for me to process what I was seeing. I could hardly breathe as I slowly took a step back. My mind was racing, but my body was moving on instinct. Calmly, I walked to the front door, opened it, and called the dogs out. Let's go outside. They ran out without hesitation, and I followed them, barely thinking. I slammed the door behind me and rushed to my car. I locked the doors immediately, hands trembling as I dialed the police. The call was shaky, but I managed to explain what I'd seen. Someone had broken into my apartment, hidden in the living room, and was clearly planning something sinister. The police arrived in less than 5 minutes. As they went up to my apartment, I sat in the car, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what just happened. It wasn't long before I saw 2 officers dragging a man, probably in his 40s, out of the building in handcuffs. My blood ran cold when I saw him. He looked up, and the same pair of eyes that had been staring at me from under the chest now seemed to burn into my soul. The police questioned him, and that's when things got even worse. This man, it turns out, had been watching me since I moved in. He'd been staking out my apartment, waiting for an opportunity to get inside. He knew I lived alone, and he had carefully planned everything. He was prepared, carrying a fanny pack, a pocket knife, needles, and even ketamine. But the most chilling thing was what they found in his possession, a photo of me, taken the day I moved in. It sent a chill through me to realize just how closely he had been monitoring my every move. His plan was to sneak in through the patio door, wait for me to fall asleep, and then, God only knows what. The police were quick to arrest him, and after he was dragged away, I sat in my car, staring at the building, too shaken to move. For days, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking he would come back, that I hadn't seen the last of him. But, to my relief, he's still in jail. Every time I think about that moment, the dogs barking, the eyes staring from under the chest, I can't help but shudder. I'll never forget those eyes, and I'll never take the safety of my home for granted again. It was a cold morning in upstate New York, a few months into my stay in this rural town. I was 23 at the time, living with my then-boyfriend and his family. We had been arguing a lot. Our relationship strained with the kind of tension that only comes from 2 people who don't really know how to make things work. He was 20 years older than me, and on this particular morning, he acted far more juvenile than I had ever expected. I had barely opened my eyes when the argument started. It escalated quickly, fueled by frustration and anger. In a fit of rage, he jumped out of bed, flipped me the bird, and shouted, "If you don't like it so much, then why don't you go back to the fucking Bronx?" That was all the invitation I needed. In my impulsive, hot-headed way, I threw on my Uggs and winter jacket, grabbed my cigarettes, and stormed out of the house. I didn't even think to grab my phone. I was mad, and in that moment, I didn't care about anything except getting away from the argument. I didn't drive, so my only choice was to walk. Looking back, I didn't really intend to walk all the way back to the Bronx. It was a 3-hour drive, but in that moment, I needed to clear my head, to just walk and be alone. The only problem was, I had no idea where I was. I had only been in this town for a couple of months, and I didn't know the area well enough to navigate it. I reached the entrance of the trailer park and turned left, walking where I knew there was some sign of civilization. I ended up on a busy stretch of road, with 18-wheelers whizzing past, spraying slush and snow all over me, soaking my shoes. I was cold, but I pressed on. At one point, I saw my boyfriend drive past me on his way to work. His truck sped up as he passed, his anger still palpable, and I thought for sure he'd turn around and come after me. But he didn't. I kept walking, determined to get somewhere, anywhere. I decided to try and reach my best friend's mother's house. I didn't know the exact address, but I knew the name of the road. It wasn't much help, but I was already committed. The snow started falling harder, and I began to lose momentum. My feet were soaked, and I was starting to feel hopeless. Then, I passed a VFW, and that's when I noticed a truck parked in the driveway. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I walked by, the driver called out to me, "Hey, honey, do you need help?" My stomach churned. I didn't want to talk to him, but I didn't have many options. He was an older, clean-cut man, with gray hair and greenish-blue eyes. Just an average, unremarkable guy. But I wasn't exactly in a position to turn down his offer. I approached his truck slowly, my mind racing, weighing the pros and cons. I blurted out, "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" It felt like such a dumb question, but I had to ask. He laughed and replied, I'm a good guy. I wouldn't tell you if I was a bad guy." I ignored the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine and climbed into the front seat of his truck. The moment I did, though, I realized I didn't really know where my friend's mom lived. I knew the name of the road, but that was about it. I asked to borrow his phone to call my best friend and ask for directions. I dialed 3 times, but she didn't pick up. She didn't recognize the number. My sense of dread began to grow. I was starting to feel completely trapped. Then he asked me where I was from and why I was out in the middle of nowhere, in the snow, wearing pajamas. I told him I was from the Bronx and that I had gotten into a fight with my boyfriend. He paused for a moment before asking, "Hey, you wouldn't be interested in making a little money, would you?" I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "Oh no, thanks though," he replied. "Well, I just figured since you said you were from the Bronx," and his voice trailed off. I froze, suddenly aware of how deep I was in it. Sure, I muttered, trying to placate him. But he eyed me up and down, sneering. Sure, she says. Panic set in. I had no idea where I was going, and the scenery was barren, nothing but snow and empty stretches of road. I scanned for a snowbank, somewhere I could jump out of the truck if I had to, but I didn't see anything. It was too late for that. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. I thought for sure this was how my story was going to end. But then, miraculously, he asked who I was going to see. Desperation drove me to blurt out my best friend's mom's name, followed by her husband's full name. His eyes lit up. "I know him," he said. "We used to snowmobile together 20 years ago." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He knew where he was going. He dropped the creepy tone and seemed more like a friendly, old acquaintance. When we finally pulled up to the big yellow house, I felt like I had just been saved from the edge of something awful. I asked his name, and he said, "Steve." I told him a fake name, thanking him with the most hollow gratitude I could muster. I ran from his truck to the front door and slammed it behind me, locking it quickly. I was shaking, terrified, and I burst through the house, looking for my friend's mom. I found her in the living room, wide awake but silent, probably having heard the panic in my breath. I didn't need to explain. She just knew. She listened as I recounted the whole ordeal, the fight, the walk, the creepy offer, and the fear. She was horrified but reassured me. She promised me she'd ask her husband about Steve when he came home. Later that day, I returned to my boyfriend's house, still shaken. I smoked weed to calm myself and forget about what had happened. But the next day, my friend's mom called me, her voice serious. She told me that Steve was dangerous, someone her husband had cut ties with years ago. He'd been arrested for sexual assault. Then she dropped the real bomb. How easy it would have been for him to hurt me, leave me somewhere, and nobody would have known where to find me. The snow would have covered my tracks, and I might not have been found until it melted. I'll never forget the cold look in his eyes. And I'm thankful that someone, was watching out for me that day. So, Steve, let's never meet again. This is a story from when I was 11 years old, and it's one I remember vividly because it was the first time I was allowed to walk to school by myself. Up until then, I always walked with my older sister, who knew the routes much better than I did. I had always made fun of her for being so cautious, taking a different route every day, but that day, I learned exactly why she did. It was a cold winter morning, and school was still open despite the heavy snow that had blanketed everything. The snow was up to my knees, and I could already tell it was going to be a struggle to walk through it. I was running late, and because I had grown used to walking with my sister, I didn't leave the house until the last possible moment. My mom called me over as I was getting ready, offering to drive me to school since my sister was sick and couldn't go with me that day. Being a bratty, almost 12-year-old, I made a big deal about wanting to walk by myself. All my friends' parents let them walk alone, so why shouldn't I? She hesitated, but then gave me a serious look and reminded me to pay attention to the cars. I was only 9 when I got hit by a car and nearly died, so her concern was completely justified. I nodded quickly and rushed out the door. Since I was alone, I didn't rush like my sister always did. I took my time, playing in the snow, making snowballs, and seeing how far I could throw them. I wasn't paying attention to much else, lost in my own little world of childish play, but then I noticed something, a white fin slowly creeping behind me. At first, I thought I was just imagining things, but when I bent down to make another snowball, I saw it clearly. My heart skipped a beat, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. It was probably nothing. But as I continued walking, the van kept following me. It wasn't until I reached the school that I saw it clearly again. The van had stopped a few feet behind me as I entered the school grounds, and it quickly sped off as I stepped onto the campus. I figured that was the end of it, but when I looked out the window during class, the van was still there, parked just beyond the schoolyard. It had a bright yellow smiley face sticker on the side, and even though the windows were tinted, I could feel someone watching me. The whole day was off, like my every move was being tracked. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, I didn't want to go home. I was scared, and I knew that van could be out there. But I had no choice. My mom was at work, and my sister was homesick, so I had to walk back by myself. I tried to blend in with the other kids leaving the school, but most of them were either car riders or didn't live near me. I decided to take a different route home, hoping to avoid the van. My sister always took different paths, and I used to tease her for it, but now I understood why. But I wasn't familiar with this new route, and I made a mistake. As I reached the main street, I realized too late that the path I had taken led me right back to where I had started. I could see the white van parked behind a row of cars. My heart stopped as I saw it, and then I heard the door of the van click open. Panic surged through me. I had to run. I took off as fast as I could, my breath coming in short gasps as I dashed down the street. I could hear 2 sets of heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer. I had to think fast. I cut through someone's yard, jumping over snowbanks, my heart racing in my chest, terrified that they were right behind me. I finally saw my house in sight and pushed myself harder, throwing myself through the snow until I reached the front door. I banged on the door with all my might, praying someone would hear me. My sister opened the door, her face confused at first, but when she saw the panic in my eyes, she didn't ask questions. She pulled me inside quickly and locked the door behind me. I was safe, but that van was still out there, parked across the street, watching. The van stayed there until my brother came home later that evening. My sister and I never talked about it, but we both knew how close I had come to something terrible. That van, those footsteps, I would never forget them. Years later, a friend from my hometown showed me an article from 2013. It was about a girl my age who had been kidnapped and sexually assaulted. The article mentioned a white van with a smiley face sticker on it. I was in shock. I had no doubt that it was the same van, the same man. I don't know who you are or what your intentions were that day, but I know I was lucky. So, to the person who tried to kidnap me, let's never meet again. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the strange and unexpected. If you enjoyed the story, hit that like button, share with fellow curious minds, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, stay curious, stay intrigued,